welcome. Bruchim Abiyim, I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi, and you have found Beit Virtuali. And the question that came up this week is one that I have gotten quite a few times, actually, and this time it was just out of pure curiosity. In the past, when I've gotten this question, it hasn't always been so positive-spirited, and that is why I, as a Reformed-trained rabbi, would use the word HaShem, which is usually associated with Orthodoxy. Now, for those of you brand new to this or just peeking in, HaShem means in Hebrew the name. So Ha is the and Shem is name. And it's an ersatz word. We are traditionally forbidden, it's not possible for us for a variety of reasons to utter the ineffable four-letter name of God, Yud, He, Vav, and He. And so when we encounter that in prayer, and we're praying, we say Adonai, but when we are not in prayer, or when I am not in prayer, I choose to say HaShem. And so the question is, why do I do that? Well, obviously I've pointed to a lot of what I call the name game, and that is, how do we encounter the name of the eternal, the ineffable, ephemeral, unknowable? How do we actually put a label to that? And that's the first answer to the question, is that HaShem, to me, is one of the better pointers to where I think theologically and philosophically we should go, and that's next week's video, so tune back in. But for this one, I've got a simple answer. I know, really. And then I've got a complicated place to go from that answer. And then I've got a complicated second answer. So if you just want the simple answer, I'm going to try to keep it at the next 2 minutes. And then I'll go a little bit deeper. And the simple answer is that I believe there's a difference between the teaching of a thing and the doing of a thing. Obviously, they're related. You know, all my friends out there that are in the medical profession, especially surgeons, have that idea of see one, do one, teach one. And that has, I think, some real reflection in humanity and history. But even though they're so closely related, the act of learning is still, or the act of teaching is still different than the act of actually performing. And I want to separate that out. And I think irrespective of our particular streams of Judaism, whether we approach via Orthodoxy, conservatism, Reform, other versions of progressive, secular humanism, the idea of intentionality or kavanah is going to come in at some point. And that's really all that this is about, is intentionality. I want to differentiate from the moment that I say a bracha and when I teach a bracha. So that's the first level to it. If I'm teaching a bracha, I want to be able to help with the various different words. But if I'm saying the entire bracha, I don't want to actually say the bracha because I'm not performing that thing. So if I'm teaching, for example, day drinking with the rabbi, coming up again this Sunday, if I want to actually teach the bracha for a glass of vodka, then I'm going to say Baruch atah HaShem Elokeinu melech haolam shechol niyeh bedvaro. And anyone who hears that, who knows the standard formulation of a blessing or a bracha, is going to know that I'm not actually saying the blessing. Now, if I'm teaching youth, if I'm teaching kids, I think how much more so. This isn't indoctrination into non-reform. This is indoctrination into being intentional about what we do at every level of our lives. And since I'm somehow a spiritual leader, it's my job to help differentiate between the lechol and the kodesh, between just our everyday actions and then how it is that we can elevate them. And so with youth or with people who are not so familiar with hearing HaShem, yes, that might mean that I have to have a or several meta conversations. This is why I do this. No, it's not because I'm trying to turn everyone into Orthodox. It's because I've got this separation that I try to do. The doing of and the teaching of are two separate things. So if I'm actually saying the bracha, I'm going to say Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shechol niyeh bedvaro. I said the bracha, l'chaim. And that might seem like a little bit superstitious. And that's the exact opposite of what I think it is. Not that everyone who approaches this doesn't do this through superstition. But when it comes to how I approach a blessing and the teaching of a blessing, I want to keep that separation. And I'll argue that the reason it's not superstitious is simply a tool. It's one of the most powerful tools that we have to bring all of ourselves, all of our energy, all of our intentionality, all of our thoughts into present time. You don't believe me? All right, since the beginning of this video, how many things have you thought of that are not a part of this video? Something you need to do later on today, something that happened yesterday or earlier in the day. you get my point. We're not living in present time, and all spiritual traditions, without any exception, have something to say about how is it that we use our ritual, our tradition, our prayers, our blessings, our magic spells, whatever tradition we're in order to bring us into the now, into the present. And in Judaism, it's the bracha. It's praying and blessing. It's one of the reasons that we traditionally say we need to say 100 brachot every day. It's a bit of an arbitrary number. It's certainly a mystical number. But what it's really saying is if every part of our day is built around being intentional with our actions, what we eat, what we smell, what we see, whether we see something beautiful, whether we see something disturbing, there is a bracha for all those things. And what it does is it puts us in the moment. How many of us have gone through days and weeks and years and said, oh my goodness, where did that time go? And one of the answers to that, especially as we get older, is being more deliberate with our time. And that's the purpose of the bracha, and because it's such a powerful tool, because we don't live in present time. I mean, to look at this a different way, how much do any of you enjoy when you're talking to someone and you see that the person you're talking to is looking off behind you, thinking of the thing that they are going to say next? They're not in present time. They're in their own ego. Oh, and yes, we all do it. In one way or another, we all do that. Is that being respectful to that person? Is that how we want them to be in dialogue with us? And the answer is, of course not. And so we need tools, and in Judaism, that's our tool. So I want to separate it out. The bracha is important. At the same point, I need to teach it. And when I teach it, I've chosen to say HaShem. So we can stop there. That's going to be about 7-ish minutes, I guess, and that makes a really short video. But there's another level that I really want to discuss, because when this is usually a part of the critique that I've personally received, what's being said is something to the effect of, are you trying to make us Orthodox, or don't you understand that that isn't a part of what we say here? And I want to answer this via 2 different analogies. One of them, I don't know if it's true or not. The other one is very true and very difficult to talk about and very difficult to hear. So let's start with the easier one that I don't know if it's true or not, but it's a story that I heard once about a synagogue in, let's just say, New York, who was looking to hire a new rabbi. This was an Orthodox synagogue, and their top candidate for most of the congregation was actually a Sephardic rabbi. But one of the committee members for the rabbinical search put the kibosh on the candidate because of a conversation that they had with them. And when asked, what happened, they said, well, I actually don't think this person is Jewish. What do you mean you don't think he's Jewish? He's an Orthodox rabbi. Well, I was talking with him and we got talking about family, and I asked about his family's kugel recipe, and he didn't know what kugel was. Yeah, I'm just going to stare at the camera for a few seconds there, and whether it's true or not, there's absolute truth to that story, because how many times is our definition of Judaism what we know about Judaism? And depending on how much time we've engaged in Judaism, that could be a pretty decent sized box or a pretty tiny box. How many times have people who have converted to Judaism heard something to the effect, when people who are cruelly and awfully justifying saying such things as "you're a fake Jew," which I've heard used so many times in my life, and if you're one of the people who's used it, grow up. How many people have heard such thing as, how could you possibly have an authentic experience with Judaism since you didn't experience my grandmother's chicken soup, or have a relative who died in the Holocaust? Well, the exact same argument could be made for a Moroccan Jewish family, that they might not have had a relative that died in the Holocaust, and they certainly did not taste your grandmother's chicken soup. We're not saying that authenticity is by birth at that point. We're saying authenticity is someone who experiences Judaism exactly the way that I do. And so when someone comes and says, why are you saying HaShem? Oftentimes it is saying, I'm not comfortable with that. That's outside of my tribal version of Judaism. And so don't say that because it's making me uncomfortable. When I say the word tribe, that can be used positive or negatively, but as we divide ourselves into streams, that can also be very positive. We can enter via a gateway of searching the eternal through more ideas of Gemilut Chassidim, or through more ideas of prayer and Torah study, and there are ultimately different directions depending on our major focus of Judaism, and each of the different streams has a different focus, and from that level the streams are wonderful. But when it comes down to, I am a proud X sort of Jew and every other sort of Jew is invalid, or I don't want to hear anything about it, why are we doing that? We're 0.2% of the world's population, and we're spending all of our time ripping down the stream that we don't like. Why is the joke so universal? The person rescued from the island, the Jew who built 2 synagogues. Why did you do that? Well, because that's the one I go to, and that's the one I would never step foot into. Oh my goodness. So what it boils down to is, yeah, I came out of the Reform world. I was ordained at a Reform institution. I've officiated at both Orthodox and Reform synagogues in multiple countries. And what I've come to the realization is we need to really be aware of when we're having a reaction against something that is purely tribal, and our tribe is very narrow. Judaism is not this big. Judaism is massive. And sometimes I talk about things in Judaism that are a little bit uncomfortable. My first adult education class, starting in a week and a half, is about Kabbalah. Discussions about mysticism can be incredibly uncomfortable. I'm doing this class while I'm living in Germany. German Jews historically have not liked mysticism. But when we only experience Judaism through the box of what's comfortable for us, we miss out on the opportunity to learn new melodies, to learn new traditions or minhagim, to eat different foods. We miss out on experiences and ways of looking at things that might expand us and help us in our search to better ourselves, to have more fulfilling lives, to project our positivity to more people, to lift up the world, and quite frankly, to gain a little bit more knowledge and make ourselves a little bit more able to exist in the complexity of this world. So yeah, I say HaShem, and it doesn't mean anything other than that's the choice that I've made over time as I've examined how I'm going to deal with the difference between teaching and doing. And so the first thing to take from this video is hopefully learn some more brachot. And if you want to know a bracha for this or that, almost every Siddur has a lot of different brachot, or just ask the question, address it in a podcast or another video. And the other thing to learn is when we are lashing out against something that, oh my goodness, that's not a part of my version of Judaism, take a deep breath. Think about that a little bit. Before we try to tear someone else down, let's actually ask, what is it that we're experiencing that is causing us to need to tear someone down? And especially if we're about to justify it, well, how dare they? Because think about it doubly, because if we're in the process of not only tearing down, but justifying it, then that's now stepping into a completely different realm. As always, thank you for being a part of this channel. We're growing very, very slowly, and we need your help. And the best way that you can help us is subscribe to this channel, like this video. I know you hear that in every single YouTube video you watch, but it actually really does make a difference. And if you're able to, then please become a Patreon member. It's really, really easy to do. It's international, and it helps pay the bills. And it's also your way to access adult education. So what's coming up with Beit Virtuali? We've got a service this Friday night. We have a podcast on Sunday that's live. I'll start putting those up on Spotify starting on this Sunday as well. And then on the 17th of October, it's a Sunday, we have our first adult education. It's a 4-week class. I will repost that, or you can go to beitvirtuali.org and look at all the information on that under adult education. You need to be a Patreon member in order to have access to that. That's usually at a higher level of membership. For right now, as we're still gaining members, anyone who becomes a member at any level has access to adult education. So once again, go out today and make the choice to lift someone up. Be aware if we're trying to tear someone down. And in the process of lifting someone up, you find that we're all being lifted up. Take care. We'll see you next time.
את ישראל עמך אהבת אהבת עולם בית ישראל עמך אהבת תורה ומצוות חוקים משפטים אותנו לימדת תורה ומצוות חוקים